Thanks, Mark. George looked like a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He smiled faintly. They arrived at the hospital and Dr. Ken was expecting them. He had instructed one of the staff to escort them to his office. He greeted them and invited them to sit down. So, George, Mark gave me your prescription. I have it here, but I'd like to ask you a few questions before I give it to you. I promise, no poking, prodding, or probing. Poking, prodding, or probing. No PPP. I'm sure you've had enough of that already. Just a couple questions, okay? All right, doctor. Mark, would you excuse us? The doctor asked. Mark nodded his head and put his hands onto the arms of the leather chair to push himself up. Before he could rise, George's hand was on his arm, stopping him. It's okay, Doc. He can stay. In fact, I want him to. Whatever you want, George. The doctor smiled. Mark told me you decided against chemo. Are you sure about that? We could possibly provide you with several more months to spend with your family. I'm sure, Doc. I discussed it with my oncologist in Uvalde at length. I prefer quality time to the quantity. The doctor nodded. I just had to make sure. Now, how much pain are you having? Not too much. It comes and goes. I see. And your appetite? How is it? Just so-so, George answered. Any other problems? Headaches? Nausea? Bleeding? Yeah, I get a little sick to my stomach at times. Nothing else? The doctor asked, as if he were a detective questioning a witness. That's it, George assured him. The doctor opened a desk drawer and pulled out 2 vials. He pushed the first one across the desk. This is your pain medication. If one doesn't work, you can take 2, but no more than that. George nodded his understanding. The doctor continued, and this is for the nausea. Take 1 when you need it. You need to make sure you're eating. The doctor's eyes cut to Mark when George looked down at the vial. You must keep your strength up. Do you understand? Yes, Doc. I want to see you again when you run out of medicine or in a month, whichever comes first. Thanks, Doc. How much do I owe you for the medicine? Dr. Ken waved his hand. Nothing. Besides, I have plenty of kindling and dollar bills don't make good toilet paper. George actually laughed at the joke. It seemed to help him. Mark was impressed with the way that Dr. Ken treated George. He didn't talk down to him or treat him like a number. Thank you, Dr. Ken, Mark said, shaking his hand heartily. 5 minutes later, the 2 men were on their way back to Silver Hills. George was talking and laughing like a teenage girl. When they got home, Mark went straight down to see Joe. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He checked the door. It was locked. The back door was also locked. Mark figured he must be over at someone's house or working on one of the community gardens. Good for him to keep busy, Mark thought. I'll check on him later. Mark spent the rest of the day checking on projects and people. He dropped in on Gunny's class with Jim's scout team and watched them endure the old man's charm for a while. He was riding them pretty hard if they made a mistake. His turn would come tomorrow. Then Susan's team would be the next day. He didn't think Jess would like this side of Gunny. He hoped she wouldn't. The day passed quickly, and the next thing Mark knew, it was dinner time and time for the president's big speech. They tuned the radio and listened. This is KSTX. Please stay tuned for the president's address. There was a moan of dead air. Then the sound of the president clearing his throat could be heard. My fellow Americans, it was 6 weeks ago today that we were hit by the most devastating attack we have ever seen on our soil. While this was not a conventional attack, the results have been devastating. Many of us have lost friends and loved ones to the panic and lawlessness that have resulted from the loss of electricity. I and the rest of your government hoped this would be a short-term problem and that we could pull together and overcome like we have in times past. However, it has become obvious to me that the burst has caused problems beyond what we are capable of dealing with and by using normal means and solutions. The president paused. Mark wasn't sure if it was for effect or if he needed a deep breath. I have been reluctant to enact many of the actions that my advisors assured me were necessary to ensure the continuation of our way of life. It is now painfully clear to me that these things must be done. The epidemic of lawlessness throughout the country must be brought to a halt. Our ability to feed, shelter, and protect our citizens has been taxed beyond what we ever thought possible, and we now face a new threat that must be stopped. The Center for Disease Control has identified a new strain of flu. We do not know yet where it came from, and we are not sure if it is naturally occurring or if it was bioengineered. The CDC has been hampered by the lack of electricity, as have most of our government assets. What they are telling me is that while any strain of flu can be deadly, this one is very dangerous. It weakens the immune system to the point that the possibility of a secondary bacterial infection is very strong. The risk to the elderly and the very young is especially alarming. With our current situation making it difficult for people to travel or call for help, many may develop pneumonia, which if left untreated could prove deadly. This virus, being called the burst flu, has infected over 10% of Californians. It is spreading to California's neighboring states at alarming speed. For these reasons, I must implement the following acts. First, all active and reserve military units, along with local, state, and federal law enforcement, are temporarily placed under the command and control of the Federal Management Agency. Woohoo, woohoo. I am recalling all of our overseas military personnel except for the bare minimum to keep our bases open and protect our interests and allies, to aid in serving and protecting our own citizens. FEMA will coordinate all of these military and law enforcement assets to ensure that no omission or duplication of services is occurring. They will make sure that help gets to where it is needed. Second, any citizen living in a country or parish with a population of over 50,000 will be required to temporarily report to a FEMA shelter. We can no longer ensure the delivery of food to numerous locations. This measure, that we expect to be very short-lived, will allow us to provide for many people with minimum resources. As soon as we get a larger percentage of our trucking industry back on its feet, you will be allowed to return to your homes if you wish. Counties and parishes with smaller populations will have different requirements to meet their residents' needs. FEMA will work with the assets available in these areas to develop the best plan on a case-by-case basis. Third, all travel without the proper authorization is prohibited. This is necessary to prevent the spread of the burst flu. No one is allowed to cross out of his or her county or parish without written permission from FEMA. Again, this measure is only temporary and is done with the country's best interests at heart. In order to make certain these orders have the chance to accomplish the desired goal, FEMA will be empowered to detain lawbreakers and deal with insurgents until our justice system is operational again. I know these may seem like extreme steps to many, but these are extreme times and they call for extreme measures. I assure you that I do not invoke these powers lightly. I believe they are necessary to assure the survival of our country and government. I ask that you assist FEMA officials in any way that you can and that you pray for a speedy recovery for our country. Thank you. I will speak with you again on Saturday. God bless you, and God bless America. Good night. Mark reached over and turned off the dial. No one said a word for a long time. Jim finally shattered silence with the question that all of the adults were asking themselves. Can he do that? I guess he can, Mark answered. But is it legal? Jess asked. Legal? Yes, Ralph answered, but not constitutional. All of the authority for what he's doing came from executive orders that presidents have signed over the past few decades. There is no power granted to the president by the Constitution to create law, but that's what an executive order does. No one has ever challenged the legitimacy of this practice, and before today, none of the orders have been enacted where there was a need to ascertain their constitutionality. So what you're saying is that he ain't supposed to do it, but until the lights come back on, there's no way to stop him? Gunny stated, more than asked. That's right, the lawyer answered. But if it helps our country, isn't it a good thing? Sam asked. Not necessarily, sweetheart. We have a constitution to keep our government under our control. And while it might look like they are trying to help us, the president just put us under total government control and not even under our elected officials, but under a bunch of bureaucrats who were appointed and are not beholden or accountable to us, Mark explained. Everyone around the table nodded their head. David had a different question. Do you think Aunt Mary, Uncle Alan, Myra, or Max could have the flu? Mark had asked himself the same question about his sister, who lived in California. Probably not, son. Most of California's population is along the coast. They live up in the mountains. I'm sure they're all right, but if they did get sick, the town they live in is so small that the doctor still makes house calls. Aunt Mary told me he's even done it on horseback if the roads are closed with snow. David was happy with the answer. Maybe we should get some horses from that horse farm, Dad. Could we? Sam asked excitedly. That's not a bad idea. We'll look into it, Mark answered. The group headed for the meeting where opinions on what the president had done were mixed, with everyone wound up about the speech and the spirited debates over the pros and cons. No business was accomplished. Just before Mark was going to adjourn the meeting, he noticed that Joe wasn't there. He asked if anyone had seen him over the course of the day. No one had. So Mark dismissed everyone and hurried back down to the Bagwell house with a large self-appointed delegation in tow. He knocked on the door vigorously but received no reply. With the doors locked, he pushed in a screen on one of the windows and entered the house. Joe, are you in here? It's Mark. I know you're upset, but keeping to yourself is not going to make things any better. Mark didn't get an answer from Joe. However, when he went into the kitchen, he did get an answer to one mystery. Lying on the counter were 2 of the missing pill vials that they had brought from Waco. There was also an empty scotch bottle that he thought he recognized from the same place. He walked into the master bedroom and found Joe in the bed just as Connie had said when she left him. Just as Connie had said she left him. He had a broken heart, all right. It had been broken by a jumbo-sized butcher knife that was still sticking out of his chest, and he was asleep permanently.